Now I'm inviting Jeremy Howard from the University of St Andrews in Scotland, but actually he has long been an insider of Baltic art history, in a sense.
Latvian. Hello everyone. Sorry, I'm going to talk in English. I did write a little synopsis of my talk when Christiana and Sylvia asked me to do so, and I didn't know what to write. So what is represented on your programs may be a little bit far from what I actually say, but essentially it represents my concern about what is Baltic art history and where it's going, where it's floating to. I like the shipping, the boating metaphor in the call for papers. And so I thought about sinking ships, traveling ships, voyages, and I wasn't quite sure about the Baltic ship actually. I live on this little island, which is very remote, and I was very impressed by Ulrike Nürnberger's presentation about how organized research and study into the Baltic area is in Germany. By contrast, in Scotland we are sinking. And, I am a little island on that island, and I feel I'm a castaway really on a desert island. So what I decided to do today is actually try to show you some examples of my work, the kind of questions where the boundaries lie and whether Baltic art is a regional art. Because if I said to someone in Scotland, oh, I study Baltic art, they would go and have a cup of tea and ignore me. Seriously, it's a problem. If I talk to my boss, the chair of my department, he'll say, oh, that's a bit national, don't get involved, that's regional. Whereas English art isn't regional, it isn't national. So we have a real problem of identity. And I'll try and show you that through some of the stuff that I've recently been looking at. I decided to give a subtitle, Indigenous boat and Veszprém's land. And I will talk mostly about Lichny, actually. Friedrich Lichny. The only other contemporary art historian who I know who has written about Lichny is Sylvia Grosser, as far as I'm aware, in the 4th edition of the Latvian History of Art. Maybe there's more. As I said, I'm on a desert island and I'm not integrated into the scholarship, so I don't know what's out there. But I thought I'd start and end, if I get to the end, if there is an end, with German art and German Baltic art, and Lichny actually fits into that in a way. And particularly the art that is created around the end of the First World War. Now I specialize in the era between really 1880 and 1940, so this is sort of in the middle of my era. And I thought I'd start with two rather militarized images. One actually, obviously, this is in Kaliningrad, Bokersdorf Church, and it had this mosaic put on it on the wall of this 18th century church just south of Kaliningrad. Just at the end of the First World War, above a memorial to those who had died in the war. And so it's a German mosaic panel, and it is the solar of the seas and the fresh stars over the bodies of the dead, obviously. Next to that is Jan Oltjon's self-portrait. Jan Oltjon was a German artist from Jeda near Bremen. And I thought, well, the Baltic doesn't end anywhere, really. We might think that it ends at the Kiel Canal or somewhere, but actually it is the North Sea as well, and it is the Atlantic, and it's the ocean. So Oltun caught my eye because he was engaged, he was in the German army in the First World War, and he was in Riga. And he writes, his diaries have been published. You can see them online from the Jan Oltun Center in Jagerberg, near Bremen. And those diaries and letters to his wife back home, who was from Slovenia, by the way, Elsa Hurt and Kazimir, are very revealing as to the art scene of the First World War and who he meets. So I'll just give you a little quote in my broken English translation from the German. So he's at the end of August 1918, just after he's painted that self-portrait, and just after he's done these works, he actually didn't want to fight in the war. He didn't consider himself militarized in any way, and he regretted having to fight. And he writes about that in his diaries. And he said, on the 30th of August, I arrived in Riga, had a fairly good dinner. Last night I gave a letter that Mrs. Zeitler, the owner of the pension Hardenberg in Berlin, had given me, to the painter Lichtny. As Romeo and Juliet, I knocked on his window, and a man in the dark appeared. He had come in the spring here over Siberia from China. He told of our sleeping diplomats and the utter inability of our diplomats in Berlin that do not help. Then, 10 days later, he's back in Riga and he says, arrived early in the morning. I'm staying in the worst Gasthof possible, but it's very human and it's sympathetic at the same time. In the morning, I walked around with Lichtny. I visited the city. There are many old Baroque doors. There are striking buildings showing the Swedish influence. There's a feel of Italian townhouses of Umbria. Oh, I didn't realize that. And Nuremberg, I recall here too. There are 3 outstanding churches with quite outstanding towers. There's the Blackheads. Inside, it's of little concern. The cloister of the cathedral is very gratifying. So this is all in his diary to himself. Spent most of the time with Lichtny, and we dribbled politically. But we had agreement. Yesterday, we drew, and we drew young Latvians nude in the middle of the war, at the end of the war, in Riga. And then he writes, on the same day, a letter to his wife. And he says, the painter who I met through Mrs. Zeitler from the pension Hardenberg showed me Riga. It's very beautiful, like everything from faded cultures. It makes one wistful. Elsa, my love, this man whom chance has brought me together with is the same age as me, and he's one of those few people with whom I do not talk at cross purposes. 2 hours we spent drawing nudes and making watercolors. I hope this will mean that my future work will be revived and will be encouraged. So right at the end of the war, and full of the turmoil of Riga of 1918, he's involved with Lichtny, and Lichtny's showing him Riga, and they are actually drawing nudes. But who is Lichtny? Lichtny is no one. I mean, Sylvia has rightly shown him, but I don't think he got much more than a paragraph in the art history, and maybe he's out there. But look, reveals Indian art in mission. I don't know whether you can read this, but the existence of early Indian frescoes buried under 15 layers of paint and plaster in the reception hall of the San Fernando mission was discovered yesterday through the efforts of Frederick A. Leekney, foreign expert on the restoration of paintings. Mr. Leekney, working cautiously with a penknife, uncovered portions of a fresco which he thinks was the work of Indians in the early days of the mission. Now this is in Los Angeles. This is in 1924. This is from the Los Angeles Times of 4th of April, 1924. And the article goes on. The artist, who is a native of Latvia and who has travelled all over the world collecting artworks and aiding in the restoration of ancient art and monuments, declares California missions probably house dozens of treasures of Indian art covered, many of them no doubt by layers of plaster and paint. So it goes on and it says, "It is strange," quoting him, "it is strange how I came to make this discovery," he said. "You might say I have almost a nose for buried works of art." And in fact, that's what I also think that I might have. You know, I'm searching for buried artists, artists that have somehow got outside the canon, and certainly outside the English language canon. In Latvia, I have done much restoration of paintings and inscriptions on old monuments. I'm a fresco painter myself. I'm familiar with the old techniques. When I entered the mission last October, I immediately saw its potential. And so he goes on to say how the father was delighted with this work. And it ends with Leekney, who bears letters of introduction from the government of the Latvian Republic, lives in Los Angeles at 714 South New Hampshire Avenue. Well, that's very interesting. Because 5 weeks... Oh, I'll just show you. This is what he discovered. And it's very interesting that an artist from Latvia should discover this First Nation painting on the walls of the hall of a Catholic mission in Los Angeles. And what's going on in this painting? Well, actually, it is about wine. And it is about the growing, the First Nations, the Indians, as they're regarded there, the neophytes, harvesting grapes. So it's a primitive painting, but in those missions they trained the indigenous peoples to work, to have crafts, and obviously they painted, they decorated the buildings. Probably about early 1820s. I mean, it's a very approximate date when that is given them. Where did I find this? I mean, it was actually destroyed in 1971 in an earthquake, but it's been repainted, and I discovered the history of the painting actually in Thomas Pinney's book about the history of wine growing in America, published by the University of California Press about 30 years ago. So it's a very strange way we have to discover Latvian art, and Latvian art is discovering world art. And this is the mission as it looks now, this sort of adobe buildings and some of the uncovering of the old plaster work and the murals around it. 5 weeks later, he's called a Russian artist in Los Angeles. He's talking at he's got a little show at the Ruskin Art Club on Wednesday, and he's a Russian artist. I said, what's going on? It's a bit odd, but he's describing the Orient there. So that's unusual. He hadn't been doing that in the mission. He'd been uncovering, but maybe there's a connection, that Indian art and the Orient. Well, this is who he is. That's the only photograph I could get of him. He's sitting on top a Chinese marble dragon. Well, actually a lion, probably. Terrible picture. But this is him also owning one of the most successful decorative artists' workshops in Riga at the beginning of the 20th century. So he's the owner of it. He's trained in Berlin under the Kunstgewerbeschule under Otto Eckmann. Right at the turn of the century, he comes back, he works with Ernst Thorbeck, and he becomes a very successful, for a few years, director, owner of this company. And now these advertisements appeared regularly between about 1907 and 1912, during which time he went back to Germany to study at the Academy of Arts there, and he studied painting at the Academy of Arts. And so he's moving backwards and forwards between Germany and Riga. But while he's in Riga, just over the street here, actually over that way, I don't know which way we are, but on Cristiano Valdemiera Street, number 13, Nikolaivstrasse, he produces an interior for the director of a textile factory, textile mill here in Riga, the Briggs Posselt and Company textile mill. So this is called Willy Posselt, and it's his apartment. First of all, in Wildenkenkunst in the Nosse province of 1910, you get the entrance staircase. Designed in this rather austere neoclassical form, sort of modern neoclassicism. Then you get the billiard room, designed also by Liebknecht, in that building. I think it's now disappeared, that building, but correct me if I'm wrong. And for sure the interior is. And he designed a fireplace. Now Posselt himself is an interesting person, a textile manufacturer who actually had been born in England, in Shipley, Bradford, where his father had owned, his German father had owned a textile mill in Yorkshire. So the connections with Britain are also clear here, and possibly one could feel that in the furniture, anyway, designed by Liebknecht. But Liebknecht is not satisfied. He can't, he's got itchy feet, and he gets out of Europe. 1915, it's the war, he leaves. Actually, he was baptized in the Holy Trinity Church in northern Riga in 1880. I suspect Liebknecht, he has some mixed German and Latvian blood. So he's footloose, and he produces this portfolio of his first 3 years of travels in the Far East. And it gives a little outline of his work. I think it's published in Berlin in 1919. This may all well be known to scholars already, and it's just me who's found it, living on my island and not being aware of what you already know. So please excuse me if you know everything already. Anyway, the album contains 24 prints of watercolors, very good quality prints. It's very hard to get this album. It cost me 1 arm and 2 legs. And it arrived yesterday, actually, in Scotland. So I quickly took some pictures. Anyway, it's full of architectural scenes. He was clearly interested in architecture. His interest in the East, that's been an interest of mine, as some of the Latvian audience will know, how Latvia, not least through artists like Matthews, looked east. So Liebknecht goes east and explores it. And he explores the Buddhist temples, the Shinto temples and pagodas, etc. in Japan, in China, in Canton, in Macau, in Bangkok. He spends a long time in Bangkok, in Thailand, in Siam as it's called. He also goes to the Philippines. So it's rather unusual. And he's producing this album. Now it's mainly architecture, but sometimes it's street scenes, market scenes. The Augustinian cloister in Manila, the Nara bell at the temple, the Buddhist temple in Nara in Japan. These are in Thailand. This is in Canton, at least on the left. And sometimes he's more ethnographic. He does studies of geisha girls or dancers. He does studies of the high priest in Kyoto. He does also river scenes. paintings. He's drawn to the river, and with the boating metaphor of the call for papers, I thought that was appropriate. So he's at his best, I think, when he's doing atmospheres. He does atmospheres in the early morning and sort of twilight, and looking at the junk boats, these Japanese boats in harbors. But he, as I showed you that photograph of him, he clearly liked the white marble lions as well. That's in Beijing, by the way, the gate to one of the temples in Beijing. Now this is in the portfolio of the album, but the actual watercolor for it came up at auction. Trying to look for Leibniz's work is very difficult, but so I scrolled the internet and I found a few works that have come up for auction over the last 10 years, 3 or 4 maximum. And one had been the original, I think, for the Yehol Chengdu monastery in Mongolia. But he went to Rangoon, and he went to Indonesia. He looked at the shadow puppet theatres there, and he came back to Riga in the middle 1920s, 1926, 27. His work was published in Bildende Kunst, in the one edition that came out in the independent era, and that it was of 2 of his works from the East. There was an article about him in Riga at the last moment, or something like that, in 1927. And on the front page, it had 3 of his works, which was interesting to see. Again, they're Oriental works. And then the article by Mirvaldis, K.R. sometimes Mirvaldis, actually says why he's not coming back to Riga, which is interesting, because I've tried to bring him back to Riga with this talk. But it's a sad story, that article, and I've been trying with my broken Latin to translate it into English. I won't go into details, but I can let you have the PowerPoint if you're interested. Anyway, it's online. So, this was in Silinj. Yanis Silinj, I forgot about him. He had given the paragraph to Leibniz in his Latvia Māksla, 1993 volume, 1915 to 1940. So there was a little paragraph dedicated, no images, and in the English synopsis at the end there was also this study of him. But he gave some wrong information, and I've tried to correct that actually. He gave wrong information about his sources, the wrong dates, about his death date, etc. So Leibniz needs a proper study. I have a student from Singapore writing a PhD with me at the moment, and she said to me, well, why don't you look up the Singapore Free Press? It's published online. And lo and behold, Fred Leibniz gets off the mail train in Singapore, and and it's written about in the middle of the 20th. When he has a posthumous exhibition, after he's died, he dies in 1939 in Calcutta of some tropical disease. There is a posthumous exhibition in 1943, and I couldn't find the one review. I think there was only one review of it until Sylvia very kindly gave it to me. It was in Tevye, and that's the one review, which is a very useful obituary in a way. But I won't go into that. Now, the second part of my talk. That was an artist who is in Latvia, born in Riga, but goes out now, and is probably mixed German and Latvian blood. An artist who is born in Romania, Hungary, and sort of Hungarian-Romanian disputed territory, actually, Andel Vespremi, who is Jewish, who comes into Riga in the late 20s and disappears in his way, is of interest to me. Now, Andel Vespremi, as you can see from the Rigasche Rundschau of 1930, does have an exhibition of his graphic work. So this is the opposite direction. And he also has been lost, as far as I'm aware, to art history. I was looking in the new volume of the history of Latvian art from 1915 to 40, and he's not there, but that's not surprising, because he totally disappears. But in Bucharest, in the early 20s, he was the director of the Decorative Arts Academy. Now that's very important. He leads it. This is a private art academy, and he's creating art that is extremely modernist in many ways. It's hardly known, even in Romania, but you can find his name occasionally on old advertisements in the newspapers and in the journals. This is one of his constructive lamps from about 1925, just before he arrives in Riga, actually. And this is an advert from one of the journals for his academy, of which he's the director, and for its exhibition of work. And his name appears in the different sections. So he's making work in metal, lamps, other works, batik, and decorative art, generally, objects. Alongside his collaborator, BAHC. Now these are two significant artists. Both are Jewish, and both are fighting for survival in sort of a rather nationalist, becoming more and more nationalist Romania. And they're doing a good job. Veszprém's work is very hard to find, but I have a Romanian PhD student, Alex Shiriak, who's doing the work on this group, on Veszprém and the periodical Integral, which was the modernist journal of Romania, and BAHC, etc. So she has to come to Riga, actually, because Veszprém came to Riga, and he is there, thanks to Irena for finding this for me. This is Veszprém in the group of Jewish artists in Latvia in the late 20s. I don't know whether he exhibited in this catalogue. I haven't seen, in the exhibition, I haven't seen the catalogue myself. But you can see he's at the forefront there. But this is all we've got in terms of his biography. Again, one can find this online. And you can see that he died in the concentration camp at Kaiserwald, actually, really. But he does turn into a teacher of art at a Jewish art school, or high school, gymnasium it's called there, in the 30s in Riga. But that's it. He's a talented graphic artist and designer who participated in exhibitions in Bucharest and Riga. He's much more than that. He was a major, major player in what I consider, world ranking. Who's to decide who is leading and who's following. He's up there. But that also coincides with what the Vilna group is doing, because they are going, the performing arts from Warsaw, from Vilnius, are going to Bucharest. They're moving out of the Baltic region. They're going to the Balkans, and they're mainly Jewish. And for much of the 1920s, 1930s, they're based in Bucharest. So my student, Alex Shiriak, has got to work on them too, and also look at their relations between the Balkans and the Baltic. And this was a performance they put on in Riga, actually. Now the third strand, I'll end with this, actually, is of my interest. Another thing that gets buried is the relationship of art history with different disciplines. And I'm particularly interested in the relationship with education, as some of you will know. And I quite like Rosenthal's, and I don't think this has been discussed enough, his work for Schola at 1913. And I was in Klaipeda a few years ago, and I went to the Pedagogical Institute, the old Royal Teaching Institute of Memel, and I saw the stained glass there, and I think there was quite a relationship. It's probably from the Soviet era, actually, the stained glass, in Clyde-Heather, but there's a nice relationship with Rosenthal's picture. But I'm interested in haphazard relationships of art history with education. So when I'm in Riga, I go around the antique shops and I pick up old postcards, old photographs. And I'm looking at the history of photography, but I'm looking at the way that photography is representing education, fashion, and sort of hierarchical order of institutional, collective identity amongst the individuals, and where the photographers are sitting, where the authority lies. So I pick up these old photographs. I've got no information about them whatsoever, but they can be picked apart. This was a photograph I found in Riga last year, and it looks like an exam in a great hall, and I have no idea even of the age of this photograph, so I would love information about it, because I'm studying the way people sit exams, the way we design our spaces for education, and we can get information from this sort of buried art history, right here in the heart of Riga, and all over the world. Actually, I do it in Scotland as well. This one I particularly liked because the photographer is in the place of the teacher in the way, and you've got these clear indications that it's a Latvian school. It might be a village school, but we can see the typical 20s, 30s benches that they're sitting on. This one you might know, Karlis Lakshna, it's from the Museum of Photography, I think. I saw it in Daugavpils in an exhibition there at the Rothko Center last year. I thought it's wonderful because this is where it's a professionalized view of education and sort of the highlighting of the voice. So that's interesting, but why not go further? Why not look at education as it's represented in painting, or sort of not quite education, as you'll find in the National Gallery in Vilnius, but also how it's represented in certificates, the buildings themselves, the museums in the buildings, or there's me, and even the architecture of the schools. Now I'm concerned with the period up to the 1940s, and this school in Vilnius by Roman Kult, the great Warsaw modernist, I don't think it's been studied enough, and certainly not taken out of its context and looked at by people in English language material. It looks a hugely impressive school from 1939 in Vilnius, Liepkalna. I'm also interested in ABCs, and Minkiewicz's book, Janusz Minkiewicz, is very significant. This is from 1959. So I was curious to see this particular page at an exhibition in the National Library of Latvia earlier this year. You try and find that page on the internet, you won't find it. And it is censored because it's regarded as racist. But it was okay to exhibit it at the National Library of Latvia, which is very interesting. Now I won't go on about this. I think you've heard enough of me. And this is how I wanted to end. Thank you very much.